I'm probably one of the biggest fans of Surf's Up that's out there. I loved the movie as a young adolescent, and I waited many years for there to be a sequel. Of course, they did sequels to nearly every other Sony animation movie, so at this point, I just didn't really care. I liked Surf's Up as being that almost obscure movie that still deserves its moment as a cult favorite. So imagine my surprise when, out of nowhere, they decided to make a Surf's Up 2, starring wrestlers, and it went direct to DVD. So basically, I'm really not expecting this to be any good.
It took 10 years for a sequel to Surf's Up to happen. Within that time, we somehow got Hotel Transylvania 2, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2, Smurfs 2, and 3 open season sequels. And yet, the best Sony animation movie that they had done so far went ignored due to the less than stellar box office performance. I always figured that was the excuse anyway, so I let it be and sat through other sequels that ranged from okay to terrible. But then, out of nowhere, here comes Surf's Up 2 WaveMania, which is a dumb subtitle, so I'm just gonna ignore it. But how did this happen? It was released quietly with none of the original cast except for Jon Heder and Diedrich Bader. It was a plot that doesn't relate to the first one hardly at all, and it's one of the biggest steps down that I've seen for a sequel. I don't even know if this qualifies as a sequel, given how little it has to do with the original movie's story or characters. And to top it all off, it only got DVD release, the only Sony animation movie that hasn't hit Blu-ray. That really gets on my nerves because open season movies were apparently good enough to all hit Blu-ray, and what if I want these to be together as a collection? Now I have a DVD sticking out like a piece of shit that it is. Surf's Up 2 takes place about a year or so after the first one. Maybe. The characters haven't really aged, and they don't say how much time has gone by. Cody Maverick is now a surf instructor after losing the Big Z surf competition in the first movie, and he's just a bit jealous of Chicken Joe's success after he won first place instead. They dwell on this for about 5 minutes though, because then these different surfers arrive known as the Hang Five, a group Cody was a big fan of as a child. What happened to his love for Big Z from the first movie? Well, Big Z doesn't show up in this movie, so maybe he's dead, but he's not even mentioned, only when they talk about the original movie surf competition that happened to be named after him. So Big Z is pretty much eradicated from this universe, and instead, the Hang Five seems to take his place. And with that, we pretty much go on a retread of the first movie. Cody wants to be as famous as his idols, but needs to learn morals about his own patience and attitude along the way. The exact same lesson learned in the first movie, so I guess Cody hasn't grown as a character at all. I guess maybe if there was a gradual progression of his personality, but he's so plain at the beginning of the movie because any kind of negative or positive traits would be too out of place for a kid's movie, even though the first one gave Cody a lot of character. So when he accidentally knocks out and almost kills Chicken Joe later in the movie, it just comes out of nowhere with no build-up, and it makes him more unlikable. All the characters are incredibly dull. The Hang Five is played by a bunch of famous wrestlers, including John Cena. Maybe they'd be more interesting if I knew anything about wrestling beyond John Cena, but they just seem so boring. They're all portrayed as nice, straightforward characters, probably because the movie was co-produced by WWE, so I'm guessing the writers weren't allowed to give the characters personality one way or the other. They all need to be inspiring and good-hearted, which can be boring. They have nothing to offer. I wouldn't be surprised if they just wrote an animated surfing movie for the WWE characters to star in, and when they didn't think it'd do well enough, they just found some franchise that already existed that they could tap into as a potential market. They already made some movies with the Flintstones and Scooby-Doo, so why not Surf's Up? It's annoying because, as a fan of the first movie, I can't stand that these characters were brought down to the simplest of levels and put on the sidelines for this wrestling movie. Sometimes the wrestlers just go on and on saying quips, and you just kind of forget that the Surf's Up characters are even in this. The whole plot is exactly what you've seen before. The Hang Five go to the island, and I guess there's not anybody who lives on this island anymore as a way to save money on the animation maybe, and Cody, Tank, Lonnie, and Chicken Joe all go along with them to see which one of them can join the crew since one of them is retiring. Don't worry though, he changes his mind at the end. Yeah, we go through this entire movie trying to figure out who will join the team, and then he just decides to not retire, and nobody joins the team. Are you serious? Now I feel like I wasted even more time. There's no compromise or emotional change to be made. This just puts a halt to any kind of climax. It just doesn't seem concise at times. They find these ancient ruins and surf through these trenches. Dangerous stuff happens, but none of it is exciting because you just don't care about these penguins this time around. There's no compelling arc. The animation is fine enough, I guess, but it doesn't seem as good as the first movie. I know it's direct-to-video, but so is Open Season Scared Silly, and that seemed at least a bit better. This is just a vehicle to have the wrestlers say a bunch of lines that may or may not be true to their famous counterparts, so if you're a fan of wrestling, you might end up liking this, but me, as a big fan of Surf's Up, I just can't believe how much of a slog this is. It does nothing memorable, nothing for the characters, and even the original movie's mockumentary style is barely represented, and it's done in a way less funny and less creative way. Instead, it's done like an ESPN documentary with sports highlights, but it's not like you can tell there's a cameraman or anything. They just do interviews and that's it. So why even try if you're pretty much going to ditch the style entirely anyway? It was a huge disappointment, but at least it was quick and wasn't completely ugly, so I wouldn't call it the worst Sony animation movie, but I don't think that should be a compliment. Thanks to Ryan for this Patreon request, and thanks to all my Patreon supporters. For only $7, you can get your own monthly movie review. Ask me to review anything I haven't already. There's also other perks like blogs, exclusive videos, and early access. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and thanks so much for watching this video.